Welcome to another episode of the Drew Versus Show. Today I have my guest, Frank King, legendary comic and expert on making mental health funny. Welcome to the show.
Legendary comic. Yeah, I've had some introductions like that. Please welcome the king of comedy. No pressure there.
No, none at all. Especially
No.
when you're telling me the story of your early life getting started in comedy, sharing rooms with Seinfeld and other people. So I think legendary status is appropriate.
I mean, I've worked with a lot of people who've done a lot of things. Yeah, and by the way, Seinfeld, great guy. Pretty much everybody I worked with: Dennis Miller, Ellen, Rosie, Kevin Nealon, Dana Carvey, Adam Sandler, Kevin James, all really nice folks and intelligent, fun to hang out with. Man, this Ron White of the Blue Collar Comedy Tour, amazing. He's funny on stage, hysterical off stage. We're in the comedy condo. They used to put us up in 3-bedroom condos. Each week we worked the club. And then they would turn it, clean it, and the next comics come in. Well, we're sitting there one night and Ron's telling stories. And he says this: okay, I'm in Amarillo, Texas. I'm with a hooker and a midget. All right. I don't care if my bladder explodes. I'm not going anywhere until I hear how this story comes out. Anything involves a hooker and a midget. And he's been married, I think, 4 times. And I think each time he was married to a cocktail waitress from one of the clubs. He goes, for me to get excited anymore, I have to have my wife walk around in a short skirt and clean ashtrays. Oh man, what a character. So yeah, it was a great time to be doing it was like 85 to 95, doing that during the big comedy boom where there's clubs everywhere. Mostly in between the improvs and punchlines and funny bones, there was these horrible one-nighters, beer bars, pool halls, honky tonks, drunk idiots screaming, tell us some jokes we can dance to. Okay.
So did you get to choose where you were going, or was it a route that they sent you on to show up in these sort of dive bars and honky tonks?
Well, it was a combination. This thing called the Comedy Zone out of Charlotte, and they famously had 26 weeks of comedy work. And you got on the circuit, and you would work one-nighters, say Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then usually the weekend was in Tallahassee in a nicer hotel. 2 shows Friday, 2 shows Saturday. So there was a circuit. And the Improv had a half dozen clubs. Funny Bone had a half dozen clubs. So yeah, there was something of a circuit. Now, people like Foxworthy and Steve Harvey had a manager, so they would set up the tour. So that that's why Foxworthy, one of the reasons Foxworthy did so well was because he had a third party, a manager working the street to get him gigs. Famously, by the way, Dobie Maxwell, comic, was working with Foxworthy the week he came up with "You Might Be a Redneck If," and Foxworthy ran a dozen of those "You Might Be a Redneck If" things by Dobie Maxwell, and Dobie famously said, "Man, that's not funny. That's not going to fly." And now, of course, it's an industry. Larry the Cable Guy. He's Dan Whitney's his real name. And the way he got his start was famously, he's working the clubs in Orlando. He was calling in a morning show on the radio, and he was doing voices, characters. And so one day he calls in, and the DJ off the air says to him, "Look, Dan, we love you dearly, but the characters are getting kind of stale. So why don't you take a couple of weeks off, come up with some more characters, we'll have you back on." So they put him on hold, and on hold on a station like that, you can hear the show. And one of the hosts was complaining that the cable guy was supposed to be there yesterday afternoon between 12 and 5 and didn't show up. So when they pick up the phone with Dan, he goes, "Hey man, it's Larry the Cable Guy. I'm sorry I didn't show up yesterday." That's how Larry the Cable Guy was born. And so he did a little bit in the beginning in his act, then it became his act. Now his face is on air fresheners at Walmart. I mean, the guy. Yeah, sometimes, Tim Tool Time.
The Tim the Toolman Taylor.
Yes, he was working at a Sears convention. A bunch of, they had white collars, but they're really blue collar guys working at Sears. And the show didn't go well until he started talking about guys and horsepower and making that noise he makes. Yeah. And so he's standing at the exit as the people are filing out, congratulating him on a great show, and a bunch of them are making that noise as they pass him. and he realizes that he's on to something. So that became his hook. And of course, that became the TV show. That's how he got the TV show. So yeah, it was a great time to be in amongst the, and there were some, by the way, who I do a podcast called the Suicide Prevention Punchline because so many comics die by suicide. And there were a couple of guys that I spoke to somebody the other day, and he said, my dad, my uncle, my favorite uncle, worked the circuit during those years. You might have known him, and is Dan something, and he gave me the guy's name, and I go, oh, I did work with him several weeks, and I know for a fact that he died by suicide. He was staying at a Days Inn, and he hanged himself off the balcony. Some poor traveling salesman pulled open his curtains that morning, and there Dan is hanging out back. And the person I was talking to said, it was his favorite uncle, but he knew he was troubled. The family knew he was troubled, and I know he drank quite a bit, probably self-medicating. So there were a goodly number of comics who self-medicated themselves into an early grave. Mitch Hedberg was a brilliant comic, a style like nobody had. It was hugely popular and had a heroin Jones like you would not believe. And he rode the needle right into the grave. It's but again, I as we talked about off air, I think that there's a combination of the mental illness and the mental ableness that if you don't strike a balance between the two, if you don't, then you end up self-medicating, and we all know how that story turns out. So
yeah, I know, because you and I were talking before the show about why do people commit suicide, right? And there are so many different reasons. Potentially nothing has ever been written concrete in stone as to the reason. Some of the things are societally, culturally, different cultures may not talk or open up as much. There's also the biological level, and that's
Yep.
what we're talking about with comedy, in a sense, where if you think about acting, right, in my background as a paramedic, understanding the body, understanding the nervous system, the chemicals, the different hormones and stuff in the body, when you're on, you're in this altered state of funniness, of this emotional high. And
Mm-hmm.
then after that, because the show's on, you're entertaining, you have to make 1,000 people laugh. Or if you're somebody on a broadcast network or movies, you're making millions of people laugh. That's your job. And then after that, you're still human. So I would love to touch on what you talked about, Frank, with me is that, yes, some of these things maybe perhaps need to be researched more down the road and looked at because of the way the brain works and the mind works. But there's an actual gift within whether we call it mental illness, whatever the labeling is people want to use out there. But there are brilliant people with challenges. And just to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and I as I said, I did a TED talk, my third one, called "Mental with Benefits: The Evolutionary Advantages of Mental Illness," because I kept bumping into people who were mentally ill and were functioning or high functioning, but they, in addition to the mental illness, they have this amazing mental ableness. Good writers and artists and singers and comedians and and on. Athletes, Johnny Manziel. It turns out he lives with bipolar, and he was the first freshman to win the Heisman. I believe he had all these awards, but if you look at his record, there's a dark side to that. There's arrests for domestic violence, and there's a laundry list of things that went wrong. And I believe that he achieved a great deal because in bipolar there's manic and depressive, and in the middle there's a layer called hypomania, where you're charismatic, energetic, don't need much sleep. You take inspired risks, and when they pan out, you seem like you're a genius. And I believe he accomplished a great deal in that hypomanic phase. The problem was he was self-medicating with beer. So 2 years with the Cleveland Browns and out. And then he got diagnosed and therapy. And I think he went into the Canadian Football League, and he's probably still trying to work his way back into the NFL. But again, amazingly talented young man. And the flip side of that coin is he's living with bipolar disorder, and it's and as I said in my third TEDx talk, I told the audience, I don't think I'm broken. I think I was made this way. If somebody said to me, one pill, one time, You'll never be depressed again. You'll never have another suicidal thought. But the side effect is you'll never process information again like a comedian. Okay, you can give the pill to somebody who's really suffering with it. I can't. I'm not going to give up my comic sensibilities for the relief of the whatever the downside is, as bad as it is. And I have chronic suicidal ideation, which the example I give in my keynote is for me and people in my tribe, the option of suicide is always on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. And when I say small, my car broke down a couple of years ago. I had 3 thoughts unbidden: get it fixed, buy a new one, or I could just kill myself. That is chronic suicidal ideation. Now, the upside of that is every time I've spoken in the last 6 years, except once, there's been somebody in the audience who has chronic suicidal ideation. They had no idea it had a name. They thought they were just some kind of freak and all alone. And when I had a young woman come up to me at a college show, she goes, "Thank you for your keynote." I said, "You're welcome." She goes, "But God tell you, it made me weep." "How did it make you weep?" She said, "When you told the story about your car, get it fixed, buy a new one, just kill yourself." She goes, "I've been having those thoughts all my life. I thought, I was just some kind of freak. I didn't know it actually had a name." And when I heard you say that out loud, I realized for the first time in my life that I am not alone, and I wept. I mean, the relief is palpable sometimes when people realize that they're not just some kind of freak. That's the benefit of starting the conversation on depression, thoughts, and suicide. And my clients often tell me, "We just brought you in here to start the conversation on suicide." Because what I discovered when I was preparing for my first TEDx talk, that even though one person in the US dies every 11 minutes of suicide, hardly anybody talks about it unless you bring it up. And then almost everybody's got a story about themselves, a loved one, a friend, a college roommate, something. So yeah, so my job really at its heart is just to go in and I'll tell people, let my freak flag fly and gather my tribe, because it's silence oftentimes with mental illness kills. If you're isolated and nobody knows and you don't think anybody cares, and but if you can get, people have told me that I'm on a ship because I work the cruise boats as a comedian, and it's a morning, I'm in the Lido buffet. Every ship has a Lido buffet, and I can't find a seat, but there's a seat at a table for 2, and there's a woman sitting there. And so I point at the seat and she nods and I sit. She looks up. She goes, "Hey, are you the comedian?" I go, "Hey, did you enjoy the comedy show?" She goes, "I did." I said, "Then I'm the comedian." She starts laughing. She goes, "What if I told you I hated the show?" "Well, they tell me I look a lot like him." She asked me, and this happens all the time, "Is cruise comedy all you do?" I said, "No, I'm a public speaker." And I said, "Look, if you don't mind me bragging, because nobody else will tell, I just got an email. I got my first TEDx talk." She goes, "I love the TED Talks. What's the topics?" I thought, I know what's coming, because I've had this conversation many times. I said, "Depression and suicide." Started counting down in my head. 3, 2, 1. She says to me, "I tried to kill myself twice." We just met. But it's like she was just waiting for somebody to utter those magic words, depression and suicide, to give voice. She goes, "First time in college, kind of half-hard, not a big deal. Second time, big deal. Graduated college, graduated medical school, had the knowledge, had the equipment, had the IV started in my ankle. Suicide cocktail in one hand, syringe in the other, getting ready to load it up. Phone rings. Do I answer it? Well, it might be somebody who would worry, come over and interrupt me. Picks up the phone, her 13-year-old son. She goes, "I don't know if he heard something in my voice or had a premonition, but he said, 'Mom, don't do anything.' So I didn't. I didn't give up on the idea of suicide, but I didn't do it that day because I figured he'd always feel guilty. Wasn't there something he could do to stop it?" Well, the good news is there are things you can say, there are things you can do. I said, "Well, how old is he now?" She said, "He's 21. I said, "Does he know his phone call actually saved your life?" And this is where I got the theme for A, my first TEDx, and B, my career. She goes, "How do you start that conversation?" I thought you do TED Talk. Start the conversation.
Well, let's talk about that.
I just go in and
let's talk about that for a second, Frank, because this is powerful. when we can normalize things, we understand that we're not alone. But what did it take for you? Because people see the outside of success, right? They see your comedy career, they see the TED,
Yeah.
they see, that, you have a public figure now, right? So what did it take for you to be able to come forward and share your own challenges and your own thoughts of suicide, right? I'm sure that wasn't easy when you were probably in the professional world and then thinking about, do I talk about this or do I not talk about this?
It never even occurred to me to talk about it. When I discovered my superpower of suicide, I did a TED talk on it called Suicide, the Secret of My Success, Dead Man Talking. And what it was I was married to my first wife, a lovely woman. We didn't belong together. I was selling insurance, which is what she wanted me to do. And I hated it, the purple passion. And I was not doing what I wanted to do, what I knew I should be doing, going to the comedy store, because in San Diego, there's a branch of the world famous one up on Sunset, and doing open mic night. And it hit me, I'm depressed and I'm suicidal. And if I don't change something soon, I am literally going to kill myself sooner rather than later. My second thought was very empowering, which was, wait a minute, I could divorce my wife, quit my job, try comedy. If it works, great. And I think it will. But if it doesn't work, hell, I can still kill myself. That's how I got into comedy, because, nothing much more powerful on earth than somebody with absolutely nothing to lose. If I stayed put, I was going to die. So why not put it all on one roll of the dice and see if I firmly believed it would work, and thank God it did. Now, like most mentally ill people, I figured I was the only one on the planet who thought that way, had those thoughts. Since then, I bumped into half a dozen or more people, comedians, entertainers, entrepreneurs, have the same basic thought process. They're living a life they don't think they belong in, with people they don't think they belong with. They've got a dream of some kind, something they think they really should be doing. And they come to that juncture and like, well, I'm going to kill myself if I don't make some changes. Well, what the heck? I've got a TEDx coaching client who gave me a name for it. I didn't know there's a word for it. It's called individuation. It's the sort of common term is midlife crisis. Mine happened in my mid-20s. But when you come to a point where you realize, I'm living up to everybody else's expectations. This is not what the title of his talk is, Individuation Now. What if who you are isn't really who you are? And
Can you say that? Can you say that again? Because that's powerful.
What if who you are isn't really who you are? And in his talk, he's going to talk about, how do you know that's the case, that you're really somebody else? You should be doing something else. How do you make the break? Because there's going to be some collateral damage. His wife left him because she wanted to be married to the banker he was. His mother never spoke to him again because he wasn't the banker she wanted him to be. You know the story. You're going to be a blue collar worker.
See you later.
Yeah, you're no longer my son. That is a case, a severe case of individuation. You chose to not live up to somebody else's expectations, to follow your own path. And so that's when I realized that suicide was my superpower. The fact that I was willing to kill myself at any moment, which, by the way, ironically, keeps me alive, because if there's a through line in suicide, it's this. Because you said, culturally there's this, and genetically and chemistry and whatever. Oftentimes, most often, more often than not, suicide is not about killing yourself. It's simply about ending the pain. It's just the only way you can see your way out of pain. And so because I'm willing to do it any time, I can stand a great deal of pain because I know I can pull the trigger anytime. And so ironically, as a friend of mine said, if it hadn't been for my chronic suicidality, I'd have killed myself a long time ago. But knowing there's an escape, I can hang in. I can live with the pain. I can. The most recently, by the way, we had brush fires here in Oregon. First time it's ever been that bad. And the fire came within 1.25 miles of our house. And I was downtown. Well, you're a firefighter. You know this. There's level 1, which is get ready. Level 2, which is get set. Level 3 is go. Get out. Don't look back. Don't grab anything. Just get in the car. Because you know, there are people who've been burned alive in a vehicle fleeing the fire. I mean, they're driving away from it, and the fire catches up.
And by the way, they need to change that shit, because level 1, 2, 3, nobody knows what the hell that means. I mean, can we just have like, it's getting big, it's getting really fucking big, and go? Like, that would be common sense. Honestly, Frank, I didn't even know level 1, 2, 3 until
you did?
Oh, and I'm a firefighter, so it needs to change.
Yeah. Well, and so when I left home to go downtown to my cardiologist for my cardiac checkup, it was level 1. So I thought, well, you know, I've got a little time. Certainly run this one errand, get my annual cardio checkup, and come back. So I'm in the waiting room, you know, and my iPhone goes off, and it skipped level 2, and I'm looking at level 3, which is get the, you know, out. And well, here's the thing: I'm 25 minutes from the house. We have 11 cats, 11 rescue cats in that house, and I'm like the Marine Corps. I'm not leaving anybody behind. I'll die trying to get them out. So I get in the car, and everybody's headed west away from the fire, and I'm headed east into the fire. It's 1.25 miles from the house. The smoke's getting worse. I'm the last guy in the neighborhood. I'm in the house stuffing cats into carriers. And a friend of mine goes, you could have died. I go, well, look, I've been trying to kill myself for 4 decades. If I'm going out, pardon the pun, in a blaze of glory. I'm going out doing something really significant. I mean, people would cry about, why did he drop back into the fire? He was saving Kiki. So, and then somebody said to me, we got out safely, obviously, but they said you could have burned to death. I go, no, that is no way to die. I've got a handgun at the house. If the fire's licking my toes, I'm eating the gun. I'm not dying in the fire. Again, because I'm willing to pull the trigger. It allowed me to drive back into a wildfire, save 11 cats, and drive back out without even giving it a second thought. Because, you know, I mean, I'm living on borrowed time, upside down alone. So it's, you know, anyway, that's how suicide.
But I think the cool part is, though, when you realize at some points, I mean, you know, you've obviously made that decision where you realize that it's a part of your DNA, or it's a part of who you are, these thoughts, but it's not something you're actively or you have done, and then you're using it to live the life that you want. You're using that pain through comedy. You're using that pain to help a lot of people, to normalize this, you know, this issue that's out there with the stigma and all the other things, to let people know that they're all right, and then to also not be in fear of living, because the alternative we know is death. And we all are going to die. I mean, that's just whether how you die or whatever the path is for people, nobody's really in control of that unless you do the suicide route, which is the ultimate, you know, of feeling, you know, control over self, perhaps, when there doesn't feel like there's control. But the positive is that you haven't, you've helped so many people, you help people every single day, and then from there it's letting this sort of feeling let you live in a way.
Yeah.
Where if you were still in that insurance job,
I'd be long gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just, well, and I had a little incident when I was at ground zero during the pandemic. I was in Singapore catching a cruise ship as the thing was breaking out, and, you know, people were coming down with it. And I came back to the States after that. And a lot of people here in the Northwest thought I came back dragging the virus. And so I got attacked online by the trolls, and I had to change my home phone number and deactivate a couple of social media accounts for a while, and deal with the death threat. Guy calls me and he goes, I know where you work out. I know when you work out. I'm coming to kill you. And I go, really? Well, here's something you need to add to that mathematical equation. 1, I've been trying to do that for four decades. And B, I don't want to die, but I'm not scared of it. So just make sure you calculate that into your before you come over. Because do you really want to go up against a guy with absolutely nothing to lose? Yeah, well, if you come, you better kill me, because, you know. By the way, he didn't show up. Do you really want to find a guy that crazy?
I think he's I think that guy's on the crazy side of town for doing something like that. And that leads us to also to talk about, things of like, what can you do to take care of yourself? Because you talked about the trolls, right? And so
Yes.
many kids, I mean, you have maturity, you have emotional intelligence,
Oh
you
yeah.
have context, but so many kids today are living in this generation of getting trolled. I mean, it used to be, maybe they throw you in the sand pit at school and bully you and whatnot, or, shove you in the locker, the things that happened to me as a kid, even as a big
Toilet,
guy. But
swirly.
how do you stay afloat nowadays in the online space? Because that's a good point you brought up, the trolling and just the new way in which we live.
Well, and you know what? As a 64-year-old guy, I had trouble wrapping my mind around cyberbullying. How bad could it be? Well, I found out exactly how bad it could be. And then I realized that all these people that were doing this to me, I would never meet. But if you are a young person and you're in school, when we were in school, you and I imagine, we left the bully behind at school when we left on the bus or whatever. These kids are taking it home in their pocket. And not only that, if they're being bullied online, they're going to have to see those same people the next day. I'm not sure I could deal with that as a young person. I admire anybody who can live through that kind of storm, because these are your peers. These are people you interact with at school every day. Somebody said, well, what do we do? I said, well, first of all, I believe the phone should be in the locker at school all day long. You should not be walking around the school with a smartphone. And somebody said to me, what if there's an active shooter or whatever? Or I go, well, when I was a kid and I was in school, we had morning announcements, afternoon announcements. You get on the PA and you tell everybody, lock it down. So you don't have to send them a text. What if their parents need to see them? When I was in school, there were kids working, one period in the principal's office. Call comes in, mom, dad wants to see you. They take a note down to you in your class, they hand it to you. You go meet your folks in the park. I mean, and then I think parents need to grow a spine and take the phones away at a certain hour every evening, plug them into a power strip in the adult's bedroom, everybody, including the parents. And we don't touch those phones again until time certain the next morning. So we shut down all things digital overnight. And maybe on the weekend, same thing. We take a weekend break from electronics and desensitize. I just think, and parents, I believe, should look at a kid's phone, and the iPhone has a way to see how many hours you spent online that week. And we should have a family conversation. Okay, everybody break out your phone. Okay, now go to that app and let's see how much time you've been spending on. Okay, listen, that's way too much. I mean, famously, Steve Jobs limited the amount of time he let his kids spend online. Steve Jobs.
No, and the schools in Silicon Valley that cater to the elite over there, they have a lot more creativity and arts and different programming versus. I always say it's kind of comical when you think about the Apple or Steve Jobs. They sell the Apple products into the public schools, but then the private schools where their kids are educated, it's very different because they're aware of these issues
Yeah.
and the stimulation of the brain and different things that technology does. And technology is not evil, it's just how we use it and the unintended consequences of use and people not being aware, I would say.
I think another solution would be starting in middle school, mental health education with a module on social media, and how just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true, and how people puff up their lives, because it's a competition, and how the number of likes, shares, and whatever is a metric nowadays. People are judged based on. I've had people, want to have me on a podcast or whatever. Somebody asked me the other day, how many people on your email list? I go, I don't have an email list. Well, call us back when you do. I go, look, I got 20,000 connections on LinkedIn. Doesn't matter. Yeah, okay. But yeah, that's a young friend of mine and I were talking. I said, so let me get this straight. Likes and shares, connections, friends, that's a metric. Those are metrics. He goes, yeah. So I said, let me paint a picture for you. When I was in high school, if you were dating the cheerleader as a guy, top of the heap, you are top of the heap. Or if you're a cheerleader and dating a star quarterback or star soccer player, basketball player, again, top of the heap. That was the metric. Nowadays, that same thing is like, shares, connections, friends. He goes, absolutely. Because frankly, if there's a gorgeous woman, and she had 500 friends on Facebook, and she wanted to go out with me. And there's a woman who's not near as good looking. She's got 5,000 friends on Facebook. I'm going out with a woman with 5,000 friends. Okay. So I think mental health education with a block devoted to social media as a tool and how it can be used either for good or for evil would be a really, and the reason I think it should be that way is we did the Michigan State Superintendent's Principal Association. We did a breakout on social media addiction, and we were expecting 50 people. So we set 70 chairs just in case. We had 152 people. That's how big a deal it is in the schools. We had superintendents, teachers, and young people there, and they were hanging from the rafters. They're looking for answers to this question because it can be so destructive. One of the women who spoke that day is a nurse and a nurse psychologist, and her daughter has issues, been hospitalized a couple times, and tweeted out she and her mom were going skiing because gorgeous. They live in Sun Valley. Gorgeous weekend, sun shining, feet of powder. And so she texted she was going, or she tweeted she's going, and she got 3 tweets. One was something like, "You look fat in your snowsuit. Why are you going skiing? You're not that athletic," and something else. Her mom comes back to her room to find her bleeding out. She cut her wrists over 3 tweets. That's how powerful it can be. I think oftentimes adults discount, like I did. How could you cyberbully anybody? Come on.
No,
I think
absolutely. And the likes, are no different than the going into a stadium or probably in a comedy show where the lights come on and everybody's cheering you on. And next thing you see 10 likes, it stimulates the brain in the same manner and the same chemical reaction, with the hormones going through the body where you feel great, you feel joy. And then if somebody probably boos and heckles you, you're like, shit, man, this is horrible. Like you just want to pack up and leave.
Well, comedians will tell you they're only as good as their last show. A friend of mine did the Tonight Show. He said, I did the Tonight Show. I'm staying at the Beverly Hilton, doing the Tonight Show. The next night, I'm in Dothan, Alabama, in a beer bar. and having done the Tonight Show and done very well, but the next night he's in a beer bar in Dothan and he's bombing. His next thought is, I'm in the wrong business, even though the night before he was on the Tonight Show. That's how well. And there's another brain thing going on with Facebook and LinkedIn or whatever, is that it's called variable reinforcement. They use it in casinos. The slot machine, it doesn't pay off all the time, but it pays off enough. The slots are loose enough that it keeps you there for when it hits. We train our dogs with a clicker and treats.
Right. And Pavlov.
Yeah. And it's variable reinforcement. They don't always get a treat, but they know X number of times they're going to get the goodie. And that's one of the bases for why, likes on, you're back at the phone all the time looking for likes, shares, new friends.
Well, and the hard part too, Frank, is you're aware is, I think, if you're a public figure, your likes keep growing and growing and growing in different ways, especially, people that might have agents and whatnot, and they know how to grow public relations things. But if somebody is doing well or a solopreneur, or they're doing well, and then the algorithm changes overnight, because that's happened, where the algorithm changes and next thing you have, 200 likes, you have all this sharing, all this engagement. And to your point about that person who turned you down for not having an email list, right? I had at one point crazy engagement on one platform, and then all of a sudden it just stopped. When I started actually advocating for mental health, the algorithm didn't like that, apparently, back in the day when you're not supposed to talk about that. And it's never been the same on that platform. And I've called them out on it a few times. And, so the hard part is you can be a celebrity overnight, in a sense, a micro celebrity in today's day and age, right? A micro influencer where you have good influencing, and then the algorithm changes and you're silenced. The platform changes, and that can cause extreme frustration. It can cause financial challenges too, and perception, where we see in this world that you should have these likes or you should have this engagement for me to invite you in as a speaker, right? Because people are very superficial today when it comes to these sort of things.
And oftentimes on on a speaking application, or if you're applying for a speaking job, they'll ask you about your social media. What do you know, how many connections on LinkedIn, how many friends on Facebook, how many whatever, because again, it has become a metric. And then with influencers, there was a young one who was an Instagram influencer recently, and then she got canceled. The cancel culture.
Yep.
There was some perceived moral, failing, and the trolls came after her. And apparently, as a troll, if you go after somebody has a higher status than you, and you can take them down, you move up in the eyes of social media. It is truly a zero-sum game. They lose, you win. And the part of the problem is they're oftentimes retweeting media from different media outlets. So there's no reason for the media outlets to discourage it, because they're being retweeted, reposted, they're getting additional eyeballs and clicks, which is what they're after. So there's no reason for the media to shut down something that's, not particularly true, or, part false, whatever. That's where how the cancel culture was born. Now, that said, there are people who deserve to be canceled. Harvey Weinstein deserved to be canceled. Comedian Louis C.K. for pulling his junk out in the green room of these comedy clubs in front of these women probably deserves a little canceling. But then people, like I said, when I had trouble with trolls, it was just a perceived moral outrage. I didn't do anything wrong. I just got caught up in that culture, and
but you and I were talking to you about mental health earlier, and a lot of times it's the root, right? It's the why. Why is that person doing that, or why did that guy do that, right? And if it's trauma, if it's something like that, and some people will say, oh, that's inexcusable. Well, are we this judgment culture, or are we this culture of compassion and forgiveness and understanding? Through, if we look at the U.S., you and I were joking about things earlier before the show, right? 60% of Americans identify as Christians. So and then Buddhists and different faiths. So if we live by our faith, are we truly the judgers of other people through our lifetime and through society, making mental health worse? And not to say that some of these acts are, permissible, right? But should the person be restored? Should they get to hope and healing, like you were talking about the football player earlier, that had to go up to Canada to redo his life after some things? How can we create better cultures? I think that's what I'm after in life, through the lens of leadership and whatnot, is giving people that chance again of redemption, and not ending people's careers, not ending things over one moment in time.
Yeah, and I think since a moment in time, I believe there should be a statute of limitations. Let's say you were in college in the 70s, and you're at a fraternity party, you're in blackface. Rather than just condemn them for that moment, how have they lived their lives since that moment? Have they evolved over time? Have they done great things for a goodly number of people since then? Rather than just this snapshot in time, oh, that's unacceptable. Because it was the 70s. I mean, the things have changed. It's like banning, it's like taking the book Huckleberry Finn,
right,
and taking the N-word out. Because it was written by Twain in that time period using that vernacular. Saying African American Jim in the new edition of Huckleberry Finn,
it's history. I mean, at some point, it's and if we learn, like you were talking about with kids and helping kids through different things, the school system, the academic model, right? When we talk about, Native American culture in the U.S., and we know how bad we treated Indians, and they had beautiful cultures. They had beautiful, in the lens of mental health, very spiritual cultures connected to the earth, connected to spirit, animals, respect towards every animal. And it was just a different time. But if we remove all these different things and we can't talk about it, I don't think you can have progress on a societal level, because a lot of it's, anthropology, sociology, psychology, and then the evolution of self. And that's what you and I have talked about today on the show, is really, having this evolution, right, of self, and trying to get to the higher path, trying to get to your best version of you. If you're having a challenge in life or going through a mental health crisis or whatnot, but our society today is just very polarized. It's very negative. And your final tips for everybody on how to stay positive as we enter a new year and as we get out of this, hopefully, COVID-19 pandemic situation, where I think there will be, those of us in the mental health community, as advocates and speakers, we know that there's going to be a significant challenge coming out of this, where a lot of people may have social anxiety going back into public for the first time, going
Mhm.
back into grocery stores, on even the thought of taking a cruise vacation,
Oh,
and
Lord.
seeing you and hanging out on a cruise ship. I mean, that shouldn't be scary. But what are your thoughts, on the year ahead, and just culture, society, and how we enter this new year?
Well, and I've been doing a Googling Over podcast. I created a keynote at the beginning of the pandemic called Social Distancing and Staying Sane. Don't worry so much about your mentally ill friends. Because, I mean, there are people with mental illness who are suffering greatly during the pandemic. However, there are a goodly number of us who are high functioning, and we are high functioning because we have a self-care plan and other techniques that we use to get out of bed in the morning. Because for mentally ill people, oftentimes the world is an uncertain place, pandemic or no. We struggle getting out of the bed, whether the economy is in the tank and the COVID is raging or not. And so I've been sharing my self-care plan. 5 things. I do diet. I'm on the keto diet, and I do intermittent fasting. Right now, I'm at 28 hours without eating. I'll probably have a meal tomorrow morning, a break fast. So exercise. I've got it behind the TEDx here. I've got an old Nordic track. It's like coal fired. It's so old.
So when you got trolled by the tweets, did you call Jack Dorsey and he got you into intermittent fasting? Is that how that went down?
Man, I love intermittent fasting. Let's see, diet, exercise. Oh, good night's sleep. Good night's sleep can be very restorative. And there's a guy doing research right this minute on melatonin. He believes the preliminary research shows that a good night's sleep, with the help of, say, melatonin, makes you less likely to catch the virus and less likely to die of it, because sleep is so restorative. Diet, exercise, good night's sleep. Oh, meditation. I meditate twice a day. It's a guided meditation, 29 minutes. It's called the cat napper. It takes you down, lowers cortisol, blood pressure, and then brings you back up the other side. Kind of like pulling the plug on an old computer. Try plugging it back in. That's sort of the theory. And then the last one is medication. And I didn't take medication until I was 60. My wife goes, just ask your doctor. You're 60. So I asked my doctor, and I told him my story. He goes, why would you want antidepressants? And I told him about, almost eating my gun. And he couldn't get his hands on the prescription blank any faster if he tried harder. And I got lucky. He picked one, and a low dose works for me. And it doesn't make me giddy, but it does take the edge off. It shortens the time that I'm depressed, and it extends the time between in the cycle. Because major depressive disorder is a cycle. It's not situational. I've been really depressed at great times in my life, but and this is another part of my self-care. Can you see this?
I can. And for those listening, it is a ripped
Yeah,
Frank right there. Wow.
that's 8% body fat, actually. I was preparing for my second bodybuilding contest. It was on my bucket list. I knew I could never do it when I was young because I don't have big bones. I'm not, but when you get to be 60, you're in the master's class, and it's not about size, it's about proportion, muscularity, and vascularity. So I thought I'll wait till I'm 60, which I was 62 at my first contest. And I did the keto and the intermittent fasting and worked out like a fiend. And I did the contest. I was getting ready for a contest there, but of course it didn't happen because it's, the year of COVID. But I tell people that's a technique that you can use as someone with mental illness or someone who's normal going through a great deal of stress, especially on your job. Pick something you really love doing that has nothing absolutely to do with what you do for a living. Something you can achieve in an area. whether it's fly fishing or hunting or bodybuilding, has nothing to do with what you do, but you can see good results from your effort in that area. And of course, with bodybuilding, every day when you go to the gym, you get a little difference, every day, and something that's a little better than the day before. And people ask me about, are you, ever frightened or nervous about going on stage to do comedy? No. But doing a bodybuilding contest and standing in front of 300 screaming people in my underwear was terrifying. But I did it because it was on my bucket list. But so we got
Did people laugh more at the bodybuilding though?
No.
Oh, okay. The comedy shows they laugh more.
Well, and I was the only one on stage who actually showed some humor. Most of those guys are very serious with their posing.
I imagine.
And they use rock anthems, the Stones, Start Me Up or something. And I did Dion of the Belmonts. I'm the kind of guy who likes to run around, never in one place. And I'm swiveling my hips and I'm smiling. And anyway, the audience really got into the performance part of it. I took third in one category and fourth in another. So I got some iron to bring home, which is my goal. So diet, exercise, good night's sleep, meditation, medication, some way to achieve outside of what it is you do for a living. And then there's gamification. And gamification is make a game out of, let's say, getting out of bed. And the way I do that is if I'm having trouble mentally getting out of bed, not physically, I can physically get up. I make a to-do list of 6 things. And the game is when I scratch off number 6, I don't care if it's 3 in the afternoon, broad daylight, I can crawl back into bed, pull the covers over my head and binge watch the 2nd season of The Mandalorian because I win. That gets me out of bed knowing when I scratch off number 6, baby, I don't care what time of day it is, I can crawl back in the bed, which is where I really want to be, and watch The Mandalorian. So that's, and the last one is I interviewed a guy in space who was in the space station for a solid year, pretty much by himself. How do you survive that social isolation, they said? He said, 1 word: routine. He goes, I go to bed roughly the same time, get up roughly the same time, eat my meals roughly the same time, exercise, Netflix, whatever. I have a schedule and I stick to my schedule. And go, that's how I remain sane you need to control the things you can control and just have to let the rest of it go. Because the thing about the pandemic is 9/11, one day we began to rebuild. The last recession, a week or two, began to rebuild. This thing, it comes on, surge, goes down, goes back up. A friend of mine said, think of it this way, Frank. If I said to you, Frank, I want you to run 20 miles, could you do it? I go, yeah, not in record time, but I could probably pull it off. He goes, you know why? Because at 15 miles, you're thinking, oh man, 5 more and I'm done. Now, what if I said to you, Frank, run? How far am I going? I don't know. When can I stop? I'm not sure. I'm not going to be as excited about strapping on my Nikes and headed out the door, having no idea when it was going to end. And that is where a lot of the stress and strain is. We have no idea. We had a surge at Thanksgiving. They're expecting one at Christmas. The vaccine's working, but today in England, they got a new strain that's mutated. Is it going to work the same way? It's just, it's mentally, it's hard to wrap your mind around. And here's my worry, Drew. Got a lot of people who are neurotypical or neuronormal who've never been depressed in their lives. They have no idea what that looks or feels like. They're probably situationally depressed because of the pandemic, but they don't really understand why they're feeling the way they're feeling. And that's what worries me is that and if they decide they're depressed or get diagnosed and somebody recommends an antidepressant, my normal friends think that's a life sentence. No, you just take them until this thing eases up, you taper off, you probably never use them again. And by the way, nowadays there's a cheek swab DNA test. You take a DNA cheek swab sample, you send it off, and they give you a list, a very short list, couple 3, of antidepressants that work best with your metabolism. They're now able to dial that in Not perfect yet, but better than the old lab rat, go on, doesn't work, taper off, go on, doesn't work, taper off, because that is a
Yeah,
vicious
the old system was horrible. You know,
cycle.
and then they give you 5 more, pills by the time next thing people are in, withdrawal facilities off of legal prescription medication.
Yeah. My wife, by the way, is into cannabis, microdosing. She had hip surgery. She broke her hip. One of the dogs pulled her off her feet and broke her hip. And so they offered her oxy. And she said, oh, no. Oh, hell no. So she microdosed with weed. We're talking 5 or 6 drops under the tongue in some like MCT oil or something. So you're not high, but it does take the edge off the pain, and you don't get addicted to oxy. Because people go into the hospital with one problem, they come out with an addiction to OxyContin, which is a whole different, and last year in the US, 65,000 people died of this, they overdosed on oxy or
Yep.
some kind of opioid.
Yeah.
And we don't know how many of those were intentional overdoses or just accidental overdoses. And that's not even included in the suicide numbers, because they don't know, how to include those, because we're not sure. So yeah, it's anyway, those are my suggestions: routine, self-care plan, gamification, and pick, try to find something you enjoy doing outside of, because the work is so stressful. It used to be you'd work at home. Nowadays, your office is your home. Google apparently shuts down their computers, the customer service computers, at 6:30 every evening on the West Coast. And if you call in, you get a recording. It says, look, out of respect for our employees, we've shut down the computer system, the customer service system, at 6:30 this evening. Please leave us a message or give us a ring tomorrow morning at 7 when we open back up. So they have forced the people that work for them to get away from the computer at 6:30 in the evening. They're done. And I think that's brilliant.
Culture's everything. I mean, we saw France a few years ago with the cell phone law. They wanted to enact something like that a few years ago. So it's really, I think, you hit it right on the head, Frank. Taking care of yourself, taking care of your people, then using your story to inspire change, confidence that it's okay not to be okay, and
thank God.
And to laugh at some of these things, right? I mean, sometimes comedy is the best way to a brighter day.
Well, when I speak, the comedy, there's a psychological principle. If you tell somebody something very serious and then you give them a little comic relief, they're mentally prepared for the next serious piece, much more so than if it was just serious, 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 serious. There's a reason they call it comic relief. There's psychological principle there. And so I don't tell jokes. I just pepper it with funny personal stories about my mental health journey. Like a friend of mine, I said in my speech, I didn't pull the trigger. He'd never heard me say that before. So he comes up afterwards and he goes, hey man, how come you didn't pull the trigger? I go, hey man, could you try to sound slightly less disappointed? That's the kind of, can I leave you with one funny story?
Frank, we've got to wrap it up for the audience.
Okay.
So you absolutely got to leave us on a high note with your joke.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Every now and then, as a mentally ill person, when somebody asks how I am, I like to tell them. So I've done 2 3-hour suicide prevention CE programs. I was exhausted. I get in the Uber, a nice young man, our eyes lock in the mirror. He says to me, how you doing? I thought, okay, I'm going to tell you. I go, I'm depressed and suicidal. How about you? He looks in the rearview mirror and he goes, what am I supposed to say to that? I said, do you really want to know? He goes, yes. I said, you're supposed to ask, do I have a plan? So pause. Do you have a plan? And then another pause. And then he says, does it involve Uber? He thought I was going to kill myself and take him with me. Oh, man. I said, man, that is brilliant. I know comedians don't think that fast. So that's because, with mental illness, most people just go, I'm living the dream. It's fine. I'm okay. But sometimes you get tired of bullshitting. And when they ask, you think, I'm going to tell them. And just see how they react. So,
Frank, it's an honor to interview you. And thank you so much for being on the show and really letting people know that no matter where you're at, you're right where you need to be. There's hope, there's healing, and there is comedy to get you through to another day.
Yeah, and if you would, Drew, put my phone number in the notes.
Okay.
Because I tell people, look, if you're suicidal, call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. If you're mentally ill and having a really bad day, call a crazy person, and here's my phone number.
And how can people get a hold of you, Frank? How can they book you for workshops, get a hold of you if they're going through a hard time and just need to reach out? What are the best ways to get you?
Just type in The Mental Health Comedian or thementalhealthcomedian.com. Either way, I'm going to come up. And on my website, email, phone number, all my social media comes up when you put that in. So you can DM me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever. I mean, I'm 64, but I'm rocking the social media, baby.
I love it, brother.
I'm using it for good.
Better than evil.
Yes.
Frank King, honored to have you on the show.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me. You guys don't know this, but I ghosted Drew earlier today. Yeah, I didn't even show up.
I was almost in tears. Like we were talking about the likes and dislikes. I said, oh man, Frank King ghosted me. Oh man. No, right. I was doing all right. And then we sent a little email back and forth, and I told you to get some more coffee in the morning.
Yeah, well, here's the danger, Drew. If I don't show up because of my history, some people think I've just killed myself.
I was a little worried about you. Okay, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, they get panicked. They call me. Hey, dude, you still breathing? Yes, I'm just a bonehead.
So we'll look for your LinkedIn posts, your Twitter posts, and everything else, and we will know, Frank, you are alive and well.
That is correct.